I will just briefly go through the installation process, just to tell you what are the main steps and something you may need to know. I mean, there is you will see, I will go quickly through it. So there is everything online. This is really on Read the Docs. So I won't tell all the technical details. I will just tell you a bit the idea. So the first thing is, on AiiDA, if you go on the website, on the top you have some menus, so there are a few interesting things. So first of all, maybe I tell you now, there is a mailing list again, so if you didn't subscribe, you just have to write an email to this address, you get automatically subscribed. So please do it if you're interested also to know new events, new updates on the code. Then the other two interesting things are the documentation, and apart from the paper itself, you have a link to read the docs, which is what I'm going to show you in a moment, which is the full documentation of AiiDA, which is also inside the code, as Andrea was saying, but I think it's easier if you just are online and click. But before going to the documentation, just how you get the code. So you go in the download page, and you have, as we mentioned, maybe two versions. One is called AiiDA Core. Okay, I don't know if you can read, so I do like this. So the first one is AiiDA Core, which is the fully open source version, the one you have been using for this tutorial. The latest officially, let's say, released one is a bit old because we are in the process of updating it. So the one you tried is not exactly this, but I will show you how to get it. You can either download a zip file, or what we suggest is that you go on Bitbucket and you do git pull, so you get always the most recent version. Otherwise, there's a second version, which is we call AiiDA_EPFL, which is basically AiiDA Core plus some plugins. These plugins are for free for any academic user or any anyway publicly funded institution. And to get it, you have to go. Basically, there are, for instance, I don't say all, but most of the Quantum Espresso code, some GPO, some other ASC calculators, etc. To get it, you click here. And you go on this website where basically you just have to provide name and email. You have to use an official email from your institution, and you will get a link to download the code. This is also still the 050 version. As soon as we, hopefully within a month, release a new version, which will probably be 070, also this one will be updated. So, but again, this is mainly for the plugin. So in the worst case, you can also ask, but you can just download this, take the plugin, and use the most recent version for AiiDA. So, if you want to use the Bitbucket version, if you go here, you go on Bitbucket, and let me see. Okay, so there are many branches, and the one we use for the tutorial, which we are going to merge in develop, Monday probably, but just if you want to know, is called beta_tutorial June 2016. Anyway, from Monday, I guess you just download the develop, and that contains everything. Just as information, there are, apart from all the branches which have names for specific features we're developing, there is the two main branches are called master and develop. So master contains the most recently released version. So now we have 050, the one released in December. Everything we release is ready to be used, is in develop. So even if you want to contribute to AiiDA with pull requests, etc., you should fork from develop and do a pull request on develop, because that's one. We don't accept pull requests on master because this really represents the latest official release. That's only a comment in case you want to contribute. But anyway, you click here and then you download you have the version. Okay, having said that, quickly through the documentation. So the first thing, when you go on the documentation, you have on this side, so we are going to actually redesign it a bit because we realized we started adding over the past 3 years a lot of documentation, and now it become very long and maybe hard to follow. So this part will be a bit maybe redesigned, but I tell you what's now, and hopefully later it will be easier to find things. You have 3 sections. This is mainly when you want to install and use AiiDA, basically what you have done up to now. The developer's guide is mainly, as Andrea mentioned, the development of new plugins, some more details on internals, how to develop, some details if you want to develop a plugin, there are some technicalities. And this is a guide on the old workflows. So I mean, if you're really interested in the old workflows, it's here. This is a tutorial we did in November, but probably the new ones are the one I would suggest to use. How to implement new command line commands. So if you want, I've already command you don't have, you can easily add it. Some technicalities if you want to use Git, etc. The other guide resource is a bit mixed stuff. Mainly, as I was saying, there is a kind of cookbook, which, as I was mentioning this morning, there is a trick, a recipe to delete nodes. Don't do it if you're not sure, but I mean, if you want, it's here. There's just the code you have to run. Okay, it's this code here. You copy and paste it. There are some troubleshooting and tricks, and this is a bit still to be improved, probably, out using multi-user mode. But mainly, I think the most interesting part is really the cookbook. But now I want to go through the user guide. So we do like this. So there are a few sections which more or less are in the order in which a person starting from scratch would follow. So the first thing you need to do is to install a database. So here we mention a bit the different databases, but it's written, but if you read it, we suggest really to go to Postgres SQL. Okay, it's explained. And if you go here, I just want to show you a bit the amount of work you have to do. If you have Ubuntu or anything, you just install Postgres, okay? And then you go as a Postgres user, you type this command to enter a kind of shell of Postgres, to type in Postgres commands, and you have to do three things, basically. You have to create a user with a given password, and this is the user who will own the database. And since everybody copies and pastes these lines, we also instructions how to change the password, because people then use the AiiDA password as a password. You create a database for AiiDA. You can choose any name in principle. And you grant all privileges for this database on the AiiDA user you just created. And that's it, basically, that's enough. Then this is just to test if it's working, and then you have some additional comments. And this is what if you configured like before, this is the configuration you will have to provide later for AiiDA. So we will need to know it's Postgres. It's in your computer on this port, which is the default one, unless you changed. Name of the database you configured before, name of the user, and password. Don't forget to backup the database. So there are instructions here. So, I mean, both the database and the file repository. We will get to see when you configure it, but you have two parts, you have to backup both. So for Postgres, there is instructions here. As I told you this morning, there is this script you can even download. It's really this. It's a bash script where you write the configuration, the thing you want to backup, where you want to store the dump file, so the backup file, and then it just runs the command basically. Okay. You just need to configure another file to set the password, so the script knows what's the password of the database. It's this file basically, and that's it. And then it's explained here. You put it in some place where it runs every day. So use cron or use something which allows you to back up the script every day. For the database, this is the instructions. For the file repository, I mean it's a folder on the disk. So for initial usage, you just back up that folder. You are sync. You backup with some backup tools your folder. Currently, however, we basically every node and every workflow has its own folder with its own files inside. So depending on the file system you have, when you really have millions of nodes, you have to backup basically millions of small files. And some file systems don't like it. So we have been developing another tool which does an incremental backup of the file system. And you will find it here. And basically, it's okay. I won't go through it, but basically, you have to just configure it in such a way which is explained, where you say where is the database and what it will do. When you start, we'll backup a few days and we'll continue. And once you are to the most recent version, every day we just backup what has been updated in the past day, let's say. And then you just have to run the script every day again in cron, and we copy over the most recent files. This is just for efficiency, because if you do rsync on millions of small files, it may take a lot of some hours just to realize what he has to do. Well, in this way, it's just faster. Okay, this is about installation on database and backup, but I think it's important not to forget. And if you continue, okay, backup with SYN, installation and deployment. So there are some preliminary steps, some of which maybe are already done in your installations. It's to have Python. And AiiDA for the time being is Python 2.7. It's not still Python 3.0, so you need Python 2.7. You need a database. OK, done. You need some dependencies. So some are codes you have to install with your package manager, like Git, if you want to get it from Git. And OK, IPython is useful because all the things you saw in the Verde shell is IPython. If you want to use Postgres, you have to install some libraries in C to be able to interact. So these are explained here. And if you use Ubuntu, it's written what you should install. And once you do this, you download the code. So you clone it, or you download the file. And then you install the Python dependencies. So we have a lot of different packages we have to install. So you see there are a few steps, unfortunately, but this you do once, and hopefully, if you have no problems, you go quickly through it. So if you have pip, or you install it, you just have to run this command. And if everything goes smoothly, that's what keep fingers crossed, all the dependencies get installed automatically. Once you have this, let's skip a bit of technical details you can read at home. You can configure AiiDA. So you have to do two things. First, you have to say to your environment where is the Python path, so where is the AiiDA Python code, and where is the binary path for the Verde code. So you put this in your, for instance, in your bash RC. And you can also add, so you can test if it's working. You can also add this line to your bash RC to have also bash completion. The thing you press tab and it completes the Verde commands. This we think is very useful, so we suggest to also do this step. It's not compulsory, but it's very useful. And then, OK, now you're ready. Your computer knows where AiiDA is. You just have to install AiiDA in the sense of create the database, the content, and be ready to run. And you do it with these Verde commands, which is an interactive prompt, which asks you for 6 or 7 things, which I can show you. Are shown here. That's basically the thing you have to insert. A time zone, your email, which is going to be your user. So when you create a node, this will be associated to you. The database, here you shouldn't use SQLite, you should use Postgres. Where the database is, so this is actually for SQLite. If you have Postgres, will ask you what I've shown before, the port, the database name, the password, etc. So this is for the database. For the repository, so I was speaking about the file repository. That's where it is. So it will provide you a default location, but you can put somewhere else. But this is really the folder, and you have to backup. So everything which is in the files is inside this folder, in subfolder. There is a node subfolder with a lot of subfolders. It prints something here. Basically, it creates all the tables. So in the database, there are many tables. After you type in this, it has all the information to create the tables. And then you can just configure your account, just type some additional information, name, surname, and institution, just to have it. And the password is not really important. It will be important for when there will be a web interface after the summer. Now we can even not put it. It's not really useful. So at this point, everything works. So you can start the daemon. You can start checking everything you have done. So there are some optional dependencies if you want. Some things maybe like PyMagen you have heard this morning, spglib, jmol. I mean, this depends a bit on what you want to do. Some plugins may need it, but it's not really important. And once you've done this, okay, this is not really relevant for today, you're ready. You can go. You have an empty database, of course, and you can do two things. You can import data from someone else. There are very import and export commands, or you can start configuring your computers and your codes. So that's the last thing I want to show. So setup of computers and codes. Okay, there are some technicalities of how to make sure you can SSH to your machines without password. And you have to do two things. And these are things you do once. We did it for your virtual machines, and then you don't do anymore. The first thing you have to say which computers you want to use. So you use the command, Verde computer setup. And again, it's an interactive process which asks you for a few steps. It asks you for a computer name. It's like the one you've been using, like a localhost or pitsdane, or a name you want to use later. The fully qualified host name, so really what you would type in when you do SSH. A description. If it's enabled, so if it's false, it means when you disable a computer, you can do it also later. It means you can keep submitting. Either we keep it locally, and only when you enable it again, we will really send the things there or check the status. That's very useful. For instance, if you know your supercomputer is going on maintenance for one day, you can shut off, set it to disabled. You continue working with AiiDA, AiiDA will not try to SSH that computer, and when the computer is online again, you enable it again. So you don't try to SSH all over the time. You choose a transport, which is typically either local, so if you install AiiDA on the supercomputer, or typically will be SSH. And if you type question mark, it will tell you the list of what's available. So if you don't know what to type, you just press question mark. Scheduler type, this depends on the scheduler you have. Again, you have the list there. There is LRM, PBS Pro, SG, what do you have more? Michael is working on load leveler, so probably this is also going to be available soon. So I mean, there are many, and if there are not, we can interact, and it's easy to light a plugin. And you just have to say on the supercomputer where you want to run your simulations. They will all run in the same folder. Within subfolder to the same folder. So if you know in your supercomputer you have to run in something like Scratch, your username and a name you want, you just type this in. And actually you can really type the string username between brackets. This gets substituted by AiiDA automatically. And then a few more things. What is the command you typically use to run on your supercomputer in parallel? And in many places we see this thing, text to prepend and text to append after each command or before each command. And the most common you will use is the prepend one, which is basically what is going to be appended in the submission script before the actual MPI run line. Typically module loads, etc. These are those you want to append anytime you run any simulation on that computer. So if every time you want to import a specific version of Python for some reason, you will put it here. You just type the lines you want to put. Then every code as well has the same thing. So if you have a module you want to load for a specific code, you can do the same. But I will show you in a moment. And that's it, basically. Once you do this, you just have to configure. So this finishes. You type where the computer configure. So setup just creates a node in the database. This is known by AiiDA. But you cannot still SSH. You didn't say what are the passwords, the username, etc. It's just an entity there. And actually, the one you had in the tutorial was a computer Nicolas created in his database. And since, again, for provenance, if you import it, you have his computer. Okay? But it's not something you can use. It's a computer, you don't have password, etc. So once you create it, set up it, you have to do this. And this step is typically just you have to press enter a lot of times, more or less. You don't have to type in. It's going to ask you for things like username, port for SSH, if it has to use the keys from a specific file, and the name of the SSH key. If you have a timeout for the SSH connection, if you want to use a SSH agent, if you have a proxy command, this, for instance, is documented. If you have a situation in which you have to SSH first in a computer to then go on the computer in which you can submit, AiiDA can take care of it. You just have to follow the instructions in this link. You can do it without problems. I mean, a few details, like if you have to check the keys or not, etc. Once you have this, you can test it, and this should work. The test will just try to create a file in the folder you specified and try to get the output of the qstat command, let's say, to see if it can understand what's going on. And we'll tell you, yeah, all okay or not. So at this point, you have a computer, you configure it in AiiDA, AiiDA can use it, can really connect to it. The only final step is the code. So for codes, there are two types of codes, as I was mentioning, I think 2 days ago. What are called remote codes are codes which are already compiled on the supercomputer. You just want to say where they are. While local codes are files you store in the database, and every time you submit, they will be copied over there. So a typical case I will just describe here, otherwise the rest you can read is remote code. So you use Quantum Espresso, you go on the supercomputer, compile it, you have a path. What you do where the code setup, and again, you have some questions. You have a label, the name you will use later for loading the node in AiiDA, a description if you want. What's the default input plugin? So you will say every time I load this code, use Quantum Espresso.pw, for instance. You have to provide the, if you want, the job calculation factory string. Okay, so Quantum Espresso.pw, for instance. Okay, if it's local or remote, is what I was mentioning before. And again, any text you want to prepend or append after the MPI run execution. And again, the most typical one is putting some module load before in the prepend. So if you compiled with Intel MPI, you need to put it here. And once you did this, you're done. In the sense, you're ready to run. Okay. Once you've done this, so installation of AiiDA, computer setup, and code setup, the code is ready. You can take the examples you've seen in the first day, for instance, and run some simulation, and this should work.